Welcome to the Debrief Podcast with Matthew Stephen Brown. On this show, Pastor Matt sits down with his friends to answer your questions about life, Jesus, and the Bible. Let's get into the episode.
Well, welcome back to another episode of the Debrief with Matthew Stephen Brown, our pastor, my husband, and we have such great questions today that we're going to bypass on a little conversation fodder between the two of us get right into them.
I was looking forward to the fodder.
No fodder today. This next question is from Annie Moss, Anonymous,
I love Annie. Yes.
In Menifee, California, and it's quite a long question. So,
yes, thank you, Annie.
let me read it like this. Pastor Matt, how should I navigate a work culture where people avoid direct conversations and instead air their grievances about me to specific coworkers who acts as the unofficial complaint department? Been there, done that. I want to be teachable and aware of any blind spots, but I feel like I'm being talked about behind my back rather than given a fair chance to grow. I want to represent Jesus well in how I handle conflict, but I'm struggling with how to balance humility, self-awareness, and the need for healthy confrontation in a workplace that operates this way. How should I approach this situation in a way that honors God and builds good relationships with my coworkers?
Yeah, thank you so much
for this. Let's see how you answer it.
Yeah, thank you so much for this question, Annie. I mean, the hardest part of life is navigating people and relationships, and it doesn't matter if it's at work or it's at church or it's family. You know, people are the problem. It just is. I mean, we're all sinners. We're all fallen. I mean, every single letter that is written in the Bible is written because groups of believers who've been saved by grace can't give grace to each other. I mean, it's just, you know, when you think about the passage, we do the Lord's Supper every single week at Sandals Church. When you think about the passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, he's saying, look, some of you fatzos are eating, you know, buffet while there are people in the church who are starving and it's supposed to be a love feast. He's like, you're getting drunk and overeating while people are starving. And you just have to realize people are the problem. They're really, really hard. I was telling that pastor who started the C3 Church Anaheim, I said, remember this, God is good, people suck. And again, I love people, I love you. What I mean by that is people are really, really hard. It was people that crucified Christ. And so we have to remember that. And so I think one of the reasons we're so offended is we expect people to be better than they are. And so I think so much of our hurt in life is we expect our parents to be better than they are. We expect our spouse to be better than they are. We expect our kids to be better than they are. We expect our friends. We expect our church to be better than it is. And so when people don't live up to our standard, that is false. It's not. And I'm not saying you shouldn't have any standard. I'm not saying you should go to an abusive church, be in an abusive relationship, let people walk all over you. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we have such high expectations, we can't help but be hurt and offended. And so if you adopt a missional mindset, because he said he wants to represent Christ, right? So if you adopt the missional mindset and understand these people probably aren't going to church being challenged that gossip and slander is of the devil. They're probably not learning the things that you're learning. And so if you just have grace, don't look down on them, but you have grace for people who aren't receiving the same truths that you're receiving. And sometimes as Christians, I think we get aghast at the world and we're like, how could they obey or how could they behave this way? They're not in church. They're not hearing the word of God every week. And then you might say, well, they are in a church and they're hypocrites. Yep. And we have those at Sandals too. And so you just have to have a level of grace. Here's what I would encourage him to do is, here's the great thing about working somewhere. You don't have to work there. Like I would quit and go somewhere else. I don't know why. So many of us work jobs with people that are just so terrible, and it's already hard enough to have to give up such a large portion of your life for work. Why would you then do that with people who are on top of the work being hard, make it awful? So I would we're not slaves. We get to put our name out there, get on LinkedIn, find another job. There's a better job with a pay raise somewhere else. And then go there. And if this happens again, what I would say is maybe you need to look at yourself. Maybe there are some things that people see about you. And here's what I would just say. Very, very few people are willing to confront face to face. I get challenged all the time. You got to talk to my husband. You got to talk to my wife. You got to talk to this person. You got to stand up. I mean, you'd be amazed at all the cowards who challenge me publicly on social media. I actually do confront people. And I can tell you, when I do that, people, they're gone. Like people are so brave on a keyboard. And then when it's actually face to face and you got to look somebody in the eye and say, hey, look, I don't like this. People are chicken. I'm just going to tell you, they're chicken. That's why people love social media, because they're so brave. So what I would say is you just got to anticipate that most people won't tell you the truth. I think about a friend that you and I had years ago, Andrea, and we were together, and she said to me, what aren't people telling me about me? You know who I'm talking about, Andrea? And I was afraid to tell her. She was single. She didn't want to be single. She wanted to be married. She said, what do I need to know that people won't tell me? And I told her, I said, I don't want to tell you because I'm afraid that I'll hurt your feelings and offend you and lose the relationship. And so even when people, you know, you and I talk about this all the time, even when people invite me to be real, I am really slow because it takes a really strong person to receive real. And so, and I don't do that to be mean or whatever. I just don't want to waste my breath. And I told her, I said, hey, here's how I experience you. And she cried and I hurt her, but she got married a couple years later and it changed. And I think she was so desperate that she wanted to hear this. And so what I would say is her experience is the experience. Most people will talk about us, not to us. And I think Andrea was aware that people were talking about her, but they weren't talking to her. And I just would say to Christians, that's a sin to talk about people. The Greek word in Titus chapter 1 for gossip is diablos, which in Spanish is devil. You guys are Hispanic, right? Okay, I'm pointing at two people. I'm hoping I'm not being racist. They are Hispanic. Yes. So diablos is devil. So the word the Apostle Paul uses in that specific instance in Titus to refer to gossip is deviling. So it is a behavior of the devil. And what I would just say to this person is most people would rather talk about you than deal with themselves. And that's just the way of the world. The world is in love with self-righteousness. So I'm amazing, you're terrible. I don't know why you don't get that. Here's why the gospel is so hard to share. We're all terrible. And we're all dead in our sins, and we need the gospel. Now, I'm not saying every person is a serial murderer, but I am saying that most of us have gossiped and slandered somebody. I've done it. I've been so convicted by it. I've been confronted by it. I've been challenged by it. It's something that I work on, and I still catch myself doing.
Same.
What I would say is if you have bravery, I would just sit down with them. It's not going to go well. And I would just say, if you decide not to quit, I would just say, hey, it's getting back to me that you guys are saying these things. I don't think I'm that way, but if I am that way, can you help me on where and how I could need to change?
That's good.
But don't anticipate it to go well. Remember years ago we were doing the hike to Mount Rubidoux on Easter morning, and so we were walking down the mountain from Rubidoux. And if you're a Debrief listener, it's not a mountain; it's a hill in the middle of Riverside, but we call it Mount Rubidoux. Yeah, we were walking down a path, and this woman was going off on Sandals Church, and how dare they take all the parking spaces, ruin this stuff, and she was just ripping us. And I said, I interjected, and I said, well, I'm the pastor of Sandals Church. How can I help? She lost her mind. And what I realized is, she doesn't want any kind of reconciliation. She just wants to vent. And so I just had to laugh and walk away. And
well, that's what I was going to say. A couple things. I left out a small portion of the question just because it was nuanced and it's long, and I was trying to cut it. But it said a friend is sharing this with that person. And so here's some curiosities I have when I see that, like, you're at a workplace and your friend, I'm using air quotes, keeps coming and telling you what everybody else is saying about you. You know, we've been in situations like that where we have had that. We have had people who don't like us, even here, who are going to people to talk about us, and then people now coming to us going, hey, this is what's said about you. And I've had to ask the question before of, like, why do they always feel like it's okay to talk to you about this?
Yeah.
And I've had to have the conversation of, I actually need you not to be the person. Like, if you're my people, I need you not to be the people that people are going to about me. And I got pushed back, over the years of like, well, but I would never say anything bad about you. And I've had to say, this isn't about whether you would or you wouldn't. It's about me not feeling safe. Like, I need my friends to not be the dumping ground about me.
Right.
If you can't do that, I can understand that. Then I have to make a choice about the proximity that you have in my life moving forward. Because it is interesting how people who want to put people down find people in proximity to those people that they don't have the courage to maybe say what they want to say. And then another side to that this question makes me think of as just a personal, when I've walked through something so similar to this is, and you challenge me on this all the time.
Lovingly.
Anytime, mostly lovingly. In times where people have something super negative to say about me, you always say what's true and what's not. Decipher through it.
Yeah.
You can work on that. You've got to let the thing away. What I tend to do, which I think most people, not everyone, most people tend to do is we go, well, if they said it, it must be true about me. And I think a lens and a discipline to start to grow in maturity relationally is saying, not everything that people say about you is actually about you. It does speak a whole lot more about them. And maybe a posture to take is like, everything they're saying maybe isn't all about you. You need to examine, like I've had to examine, like, what if this is probably true? Have I struggled with? Have I done? Could be annoying that I haven't thought of. How can I grow? And another is maybe that person's just a person that talks about people constantly to avoid dealing with themselves.
Yes. Amen.
Maybe
now you're preaching. That's my job.
Maybe it's not all about all of the bad things you're doing at work. So I would, what I would say is I would tell your friend, listen, I appreciate your feedback to me. You're a friend if you have something to speak. Otherwise, I need a few things from you. I need you, maybe to tell people like, hey, I love so-and-so. I'm probably not the person to come to with your grievances about them. Find someone else because it puts me in a weird situation. And then also, I need you to stop telling me what everybody bad is saying about me. Because what good does that do? Because then it does make it about them. So, I think there's some boundaries that need to be put in place and let them have their opinion of you. Like, right now I'm on a big let them theory deal. Mel Robbins is helping me literally mentally mature in some of these ways. Let them, but then let you. If it doesn't change and you're not okay with it, let you make a new decision to go work somewhere else. And maybe you endure it for a while, but you don't have to be there.
And I think we just, we have a friend, and I don't want to say her name, but she just took an intentional demotion from one hospital to another, makes $8 an hour less because the people at the other hospital were so toxic. And I said, how is it? And she said, wonderful. She would rather make less money and be with good people than make more money and be with backstabbers and gossips and slanderers. And I just think you have to, so oftentimes, right, we make money, is the measurement of happiness and success. Well, if somebody's destroying you, it doesn't matter how much money you make. If you're miserable, you're miserable. And money can't buy happiness. So I would say make less money and be somewhere, where you're happy. You got to pay your bills, but
Right.
You're not a slave. You don't have to stay in a job. You don't. There's a reason they pay you. You are not obligated to be there. So,
I remember being in a situation like this, and the person telling me all of the bad things that someone was saying about me, and I knew those same people were saying terrible things about them when they're not in the room, which tends to be very true about how gossip circle people who struggle with that work, right? And I remember in my mind thinking, you're so lucky you have the luxury of not knowing what they say about you when you're not in the room.
Yeah.
I remember having that luxury. Now I just know what they say about me and how painful that is. And that's a part of not everything someone says about you is true. Like you do need to be self-reflective, be real with yourself, but also over time, people who are that way, who are constantly talking about people, other people get it and they start to see it and people make their own and like reveal their own reputation. So you think the reputation's about you. Over time, it'll be about them. But there are some boundaries. You're not defenseless. You can stick up for yourself. You can tell the friend always telling you, I need you to stop telling me. And if we are friends, I need you to stop. You know, a thing you and I have been dealing with a lot lately is like kind of wondering like is everybody at work a friend? Mm-hmm. Or are some people colleagues?
Yeah, that's the word we use, colleague.
And that's where we get...
Not for any of you.
That's where you get... It's a good mental understanding because this person's saying, my friend at work is always telling me, well, maybe they're just your colleague and they're not your friend.
Yeah.
You know, and it's different. And when you see them as a colleague, it's like, okay, you're maybe less offended that they're listening. So there is some maturing relationally and some nuances here for that person. But it's a great question. And I'm so sorry for whoever's going through that because we have both been there and it is never fun. And yeah, so good luck with that. Mm-hmm. Okay, next question comes from Letty in Rialto, California. The question is, my family has been at odds because of Trump's deportation of immigrants. I'm so glad I'm not answering this anymore. Yeah. One daughter says God would not support illegals breaking the law. I, however, disagree. I think God would be compassionate. What does the Bible say is right when it comes to this?
Well, so the Bible is an ancient book where borders moved, and most countries were city-states. So we would not say we're American or Californian. We would say we're Riversidean. And so that's kind of the way. So it's just different. Borders were much more fluid. It's not until really the British that they just love lines. You know, they love drawing lines and measuring things, the British and the French. So we can thank them for all these wonderful things that we have around the world. And so borders are a relatively new thing, you know. In the ancient world, there were rivers, mountains, and seas, bodies of water, established borders. And so now we have these arbitrary lines drawn. I do think they should be respected, and I do think that they are important. What I want Christians to do on this issue is you have to learn to think like a Christian about theological things, and then you have to have another mind to think like an American and as a citizen. And so what I mean by that is, let's take the issue of abortion. So as a Christian, right, what do you think I think about abortion?
That it's wrong.
Yeah, I don't know why you hesitated. I think it's wrong and it's immoral.
I didn't hesitate.
So as an American, right, whether or not a woman has the right to do that as a citizen is debatable. So those are two different issues. Mm-hmm. The moral question is developed by the Bible. The whether or not a woman has the right to do, that's a legal question. And these things run, you know, down the gamut. Like I have real opinions about marijuana, and I, again, for everybody who owns a dispensary out there, please tithe. But I am against marijuana. I don't think it's good. I think you are intoxicated every time that you smoke it. I think it does terrible things to people's minds. I think it's awful. That's my moral opinion on marijuana. Do I believe that my moral opinion dictates what people do to their own bodies and what they smoke and how they ingest? See what I'm saying? So that's a little less controversial issue where I have a moral value and judgment, but I also understand that as an American citizen, I don't want your morals to dictate my life. It's why, you know, I tend to be a libertarian, and they're the most unpopular position on earth. You know, and I'm just, you know, kind of, you do you just don't mess with me and let me worship God in my way. And that never happens. That's why nobody ever votes libertarian. So on this issue, what would God say about immigration? God cares about immigrants. I mean, you know, people have to move borders. Jesus moved borders. Jesus had to flee. But also, you have to understand, Jesus went from Nazareth to Bethlehem because the Romans said to. Mary and Joseph weren't like, you know what, let's go on a hike. It was the government said, we want to do this census. You could argue whether it was moral or not. She was pregnant, whether they should have to do it or not, whether it was right. You know, they're an indigenous people group, and you got white dudes from Rome telling, you know, you can do all that stuff. Mary and Joseph just did it. And so, and God still worked in it. And so I think that governments have to be governments. And Romans said governments ordained by God to carry out rules and enact justice. That's what God says the purpose of governments are. But there are going to be things within that I disagree with. I don't agree with prostitution. It makes me sick. but that's me. And so morally I'm on this hand, but the reality is people are going to do that. So I don't know that I have an answer for that specifically. That's something for politicians and cities to figure out, because if it gets out of control, it's really bad. It's terrible for communities, for people, for a situation. I mean, the whole thing is ugly. So it's got to be regulated. And so I think with this issue, what we need to do is say, look, God says very clearly that we have to have a heart for people that are downtrodden and downcast. And here's the thing. If we were in Nicaragua, if we were in Honduras, if we were in some of those Central American countries, if we were in Colombia, what's the one with the dictator with all the oil? Not Ecuador, Venezuela, right? They should be the richest country in South America, but it's absolutely broken. I would try to illegally immigrate here without question, because here's the thing. America is the greatest country on earth. Poor people in America do not immigrate to other countries, period. Poor people in America are not flocking to China. Poor people in China are doing whatever they can to cross the border at Mexico. So I have to have compassion and understand that for them. I also understand that a government's got to govern. And there's got to be a process by which people come in and can assimilate, and we can handle that. And what I would say is, I'm not a politician. The border's a problem. And I would say this. It's to every person out there who feels compassion for these people, you need to understand it's run by the cartel. These oftentimes are sex trafficked children, people with gunpoint, packing in drugs. This is an evil organization that is smuggling these people across, and it's terrible. We need better organization to allow more people to immigrate and allow them to come in, but it needs to be moral and above board, and I would say legal. But I'm not going to lose. You're never going to hear me preach a sermon on that or whatever. And I don't care the citizenship status of anybody in our church. My job is to love them and preach for them. But I understand that, America's got to do their job. And I would say, I don't understand Trump's deportation plan, but as far as I understand, it's criminals is where they're starting. I don't want known criminals and assailants to be on our streets, and we don't know who they are or where they've come from, but we know they've done a crime. I don't want those around our girls. I don't want that around our grandson. America's got enough wackos. We don't need to inherit any more from other countries. So I want to make sure that it's safe. I think that as Christians, we can say, look, we want to have an open door to allow as many people as possible, but we need to know who they are and what they're about. And I think that's important. And here's what I think is missing. A lot of these immigrants immigrate into poor communities where it's already a mess. It's already chaos. Their resources are already stretched. And oftentimes it increases crime in those areas and harms those people the most. The people that are the most desperate, the most downtrodden in those areas. You know what San Bernardino doesn't need any more of? Crime. And oftentimes when you have desperate people that have immigrated illegally, they can't work, they have to resort to crime to support themselves. So it creates a huge problem. So here's what I would say is, what's really important here is to love each other as a family and try to say, look, here's what I've learned about my government. I don't always know what they're doing, and they've not always been honest with me about how they're doing. So I just, now with political issues, I'm just like, man, I don't know. And I realize many of you have a podcast and a chart and a graph, and you've got it all figured out. I just don't anymore, because the misinformation that comes from media, from government itself is oftentimes so confusing. I don't know what the truth is. What I would say this is, God's will, really, it's the wrong question. God's will is for your family, is that you would love each other even though you disagree, and that you learn to hear each other out and still love each other at the end of the day. Here's what's wrong with politics. It splits families. And so it's splitting this family. One daughter says this, another daughter says this. Now we don't talk. That can't be the win. The win is we need to be able to passionately disagree and have conversation and hopefully try to, share our side. That's my opinion on that. I think Trump is a lightning rod, and Well,
that's what I was going to say is, you and I have talked recently about, it says, or you said something like, from what you understand, it's starting with the criminals. And
I could be wrong. So don't hate me.
But
Leave our
the
church.
point is, I think people should do a little bit of research. I've shared with you recently, I follow 2 different people in particular on social media. And every single day when I see their stories, it couldn't be more polarizing.
Yeah.
Like one person is like if you want to believe everything horrible about Trump, everything in your algorithm is just going to feed and pump you with clickbait and every single thing. If you wanted to believe everything was horrible about previously Biden, I know Trump's president now, like that's what you're going to see. And so that's what I think we have to be so careful of in this day and age is like what the media is wanting us to believe to support whoever they support, however they support it. And so you can't just say like Trump's taking children and throwing like whatever, or if it was Biden doing whatever, like you have to really do some research on your own. I'm tending to start to believe that everything the media is saying is with a bias, with an agenda. And then you have families splitting up over what the algorithm is now feeding them based on whatever. So I think it's so important to actually go, well, let me understand a little bit more about what Trump's policy really is, or whoever's policy really is, or whatever the issue is, and be so careful to all of us to react. You know, if let's say the one daughter, like all she's seeing is this is what's happening, instead of being like, that's wrong. Like, you know, I haven't read that. I'll look that up a little more. Maybe I need to research more. But I think all of us need to be so mindful to not read a headline, not read a story. You and I have read stories. We've read stories about ourselves where we're like, that actually couldn't be farther from the truth. But it sold things, and that's the point, to sell things, to support, to create a divide. And it's working in your family. And so all you can do as depends on you is don't attack your daughter, your sister, whatever daughter is against or differing from you. Maybe ask some curious questions. Say, let's both do a little bit more research and talk about it. But at the end of the day, nothing out there is worth me and you being divided, like kind of a deal. But it is interesting how you can find so much evidence to support the side you want to support based on what the media is doing. So that's a great answer on a tough thing. I'm glad you had to do it.
Yeah, well, thank you. So, Letty, I would say, you know, God cares about the immigrants, but God also cares about your mom and your dad and your family. And I prayed with a Hispanic woman and a white man. They were married, I believe. I can't confirm that, but they came up for prayer because their daughters had called them Nazis because they were Trump supporters. And so that just broke my heart. And that's not to say that I am a Trump supporter. It's just to say, look, that's where the toxic level of politics has gotten. You know, you have children calling a woman of color a Nazi. Like it's just so bizarre to me. And I just said, I'm so sorry. And I just prayed for them. And, you know, what I would say to young people is your views and your ideas and understanding of politics will change. I don't know whether it will go left or right, but it will change. And you will have clarity that you just can't have when you're younger. And again, like I said, immigration is a huge issue. It's a complex issue. And, you know, on the one hand, it's about people needing freedom and food. And I think that's important. And God's on that side. On the other hand, it's about gangsters, the cartel, smuggling and selling people. And that is condemned in the Bible. It's that's condemned.
Yeah.
And so we can't just act like these are all freedom-loving people seeking work when some of them are being sold as slaves into our country. And
some are coming to harm and not do good.
Yeah.
So not everybody coming is trying to flee some kind of a
it's like when we bring people to Israel, you know, they all think, oh my gosh, this is God's country, everybody loves each other. And I always love when Moshe, he's our guide, he's like, no, we have our share of idiots, criminals, and pedophiles too. You know, so there's no group of people is perfect. And that's the challenge with immigration. You know, I'm sure many of them.
And it's so nuanced. It's not just cut and dry about it.
And I think that's the thing that's so weird now is, right, everybody wants to make it black and white. And, you know, you just got to figure it out. And so as Christians, right, we got to think with two brains, our God brain and then our citizenship brain. Countries have to function. That's a reality. And as Christians, we need to be compassionate. And so as churches, like our 520 offering that we're getting ready to give, as a church, we voluntarily are going to give our money for children who are sold into slavery. We're going to do that as a church and raise hopefully hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I think that's really, really important. And the problem with so much of social media, right? Righteousness is outrage. I make a post, I make an insult, and therefore I'm good. And really what we want to do as Christians is really try to make a difference and make a change. And it's not just the immigration issue at our border, it's across the globe. People don't eat, people are starving, women are mistreated, and children are sold into slavery. The world is an evil place. And we want to be concerned and compassionate to all of them, and that's hard. So I'll be praying for you, Letty. That's a great question. And it's just really, really tough. So
yeah, that's great. That's great. Thank you. Okay, this final question today comes from Chris in Harupa Valley, California. And I won't speak to this, so I'll just read you the question. It says, what advice would you give a Christian man who is trying to balance being a son of God, a husband, a father, a brother, and a friend? I think those are all things similar that you manage on the regular.
So sweet. Well, I try. Chris, let me just say, this is probably one of my favorite questions ever. I love to hear that there are men out there that are trying to do these things. And if you're a woman and you've given up, find Chris. So he's out there, right?
And
he's
if Chris
ready.
is taken, leave
We're
him
sorry.
alone.
Yeah, we're sorry.
He's off limits.
So what advice would I give a Christian man who's trying to balance being a son of...
Taken. He's a husband.
Yeah, he's a husband. There
Ladies,
we go.
back
Sorry,
off.
Chris. I just made you stumble.
Sorry, Chris's wife.
Yeah. What I would say is, way to go. You are a son of God, and I think that's an awesome thing. And so what I would say is, as you pursue these things, stay humble. Just continue to admit that you're learning and you don't know. We just had a discussion this morning where I said something that I thought was a compliment, and you communicated to me that it was an insult. I literally was like, oh my gosh. Now, early Matt Brown would have got upset. I would have got offended. I would have snapped back. And older, more wiser Matt Brown just went, oh, I'm so sorry. That's not what I meant. Because like younger Matt Brown, I'm never good enough. You always think I got it wrong. Like, I go on this rant. And so like just a godly husband is someone who understands you get it wrong, and that's okay. It's not okay to be wrong, but it's okay to admit that and say you're sorry. And that's what I would say that what you got to do. I think for a father, I would just say this, as we're holding our grandson, and I look at Chris, you guys can't see him, but I can see him. It goes so fast. Just enjoy it and love every moment of it. It's hard, but it's so fast. And, parenthood is a challenging thing, but it's a beautiful thing. And it's something that I wish more young people wanted to do. I see more and more young people kind of pushing marriage off and pushing parenting off. And I think it helps you grow up. I think it teaches you how selfish you are, how self-centered you are, and but how much more God can do in your life. So I've loved how parenthood challenged me and blessed me. And so I would just say, stay humble in that as a father. And then as a brother, I'm guessing he means as like he's got siblings. I would just say, love your family. One of the shows Tammy and I are watching, it's an old show. I think it was 2010 to 2015. It's called Parenthood. And we just started watching it because we're 10 years behind everyone else. But what I love about the show is I love watching the siblings interact. And there's this scene where one of the siblings, the brothers, had done something terrible to an older brother. And the sister challenged the older brother with, what our brother did was awful, terrible, and evil and wrong. And I'm not saying that it was right, but you are his brother and you have to forgive him because you don't have another. And I just think we got to remember that family. It's really easy to discard family, get wounded, and move on. But as Christians, we're called to really love our family and care for our families. That's what breaks my heart, with Letty's question. I think God's heart is broken for the suffering of people around the world. It's broken for the treatment of minorities in America, but it's also broken for families who are looking for every opportunity to split up because they disagree. And love is not loving each other because we agree and see things the same way. Love is saying, I'm in this even though we disagree. So I would encourage you to do that. And then I would just say as a friend, when you're these things, a son of God, a husband, a father, a brother, I think it's hard to be a friend. And you and I have recently reached out to some friends. You met with the wife, I met with the husband, and we just had to say sorry. Like, look, we've not managed our friendship well. And I was out to breakfast with this guy in our church, and we've been friends, since college, but I don't know how long he'd been at Sandals, 25 years. And we were sitting at breakfast, and I just said, man, I'm really sorry I didn't handle our friendship well as I've been your pastor. And he just started crying. And I don't even think he said anything other than, I forgive you, which was nice. But he was so shocked by it. And so I just think when you get all these things on your plate, it's really, really hard to continue to juggle friendship. And let me say this, friendships need to change as you become a husband, a father, and a professional. Because it can't be the way it was. So here's the lie. You can add a wife, you can add a kid, you can add a career, and the friendship gets the same amount of time. It just doesn't. Everybody has 24 hours in a day. Everybody has 7 days a week. And so when you say yes to a wife, that means friends have to say no to time. When you say yes to kids, that means friends get less time. When you say yes to pursuing a career, growing in your skills, right? Your friends, and if they love you, they're willing to take that back seat. That's not what I did with our friend. I just didn't know how to manage. And I say this humbly. I don't mean this arrogantly at all. Our fame, I didn't handle that well.
I would say recognition.
There we go. That's a better word. That's a more humble word. So thank God for a wife on the show. I didn't know how to handle our recognition and manage relationships and tensions. And with the growing recognition and fame, there was also a growing recognition and criticism. It was equal. And I didn't handle either of those well. And so, this is a really sweet person that still loves us. And is so great. And that's
and didn't get the best version.
And didn't get the best version of me. And so, but my kids have not always got the best version of me. You have not always got the best version of me. My parents have not always got the best version of me. And so I think part of being a Christian man, Chris, is just admitting you're going to blow it and be the first to apologize and say, I'm so sorry. And, that's what it means to be a Christian. So.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
I said I wasn't going to add because obviously I'm not balancing how to be a Christian man, husband, whatever. But I think when we all are getting the best version of you, and I shared this with you recently, it's when you are the most connected to who you want to be because who God calls you to be. So I've said this to my daughters so many times. And to my son in his own way. But I've told my girls, you want your husband to love God more than you because you get the best version of who he can be as a result of that, which has nothing to do with you. I said, there are seasons when your dad, has been the best husband, friend, partner to me that's had nothing to do with me or your love for me, but had everything to do with the kind of man God's calling you to be, who he tells you to be to me as a dad, as a husband, as a partner, which isn't like I did something to earn that. That's completely been between you and God. Yeah. And so I would say when you're balancing that the best, it's when God and your time with him, the time in the word, your time in prayer, we get the outpouring of the best of balancing the rest of that because you're doing it between you and God, not between me and you, you and the kids, you and our friends. And when we get the worst version of you, it's been when that's lacking and you're doing on your own energy and your own motive, on your own feelings, on your own ambition, then we get the worst version of you. And so that's I don't know if that's helpful, but awesome. That's been my experience with you personally. And so, these are great questions. So for everybody, thank you guys so much for listening to this week's episode. Great job on some very, very nuanced and tricky questions. I'm like, we're going to tackle immigration today. Okay.
That was not my idea. That was your question. So,
but it's a good question. And that's what we want to do here on this podcast is answer questions that are real, that might not be easy, but they're real. So if you appreciate this, we just encourage you to subscribe to it. Share it with friends that might have these similar questions that maybe you don't want to answer, but Matt will stick his neck out on the line and answer for you. And if you have questions, send them in to us. But if this show is meaningful to you and the ministry of Sandals Church, we would love to have you help support us here by going to sandalschurch.com/support and help make all of this possible. It is a worthy cause that's helping What we hope is a lot of people, as they navigate what it looks like to become more like Jesus, a disciple of him, and grow in discipling others. So it's something meaningful, and all of your support matters so, so much to us. So thank you for listening, supporting the show, trusting us with some very hard questions, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for checking out this episode. If you'd like to support this podcast, you can donate at sandalschurch.com/support. This podcast is a way for Pastor Matt Brown to answer your questions about topics like the Bible, God, relationships, and culture. Like Pastor Matt often says on the show, a podcast is not a pastor. If you'd like prayer or need to speak with someone about a specific situation you are going through, you can email us at help@sandalschurch.com. If you enjoy this podcast, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for being a Debrief listener.